Good morning, guys. It is actually autumn in New York. Well, not technically. Technically, that doesn't start until around the 21st of this month, but it feels like autumn. When we got up this morning, it's actually a little chilly. It's like 65 degrees out here, and it's amazing. I love it. Um, I wanted to talk about something today that we've talked about before in the past, but we get new patrons on here all the time. People who may not have heard, things we talked about previously, or sometimes it's like we need to hear things again. There's a thing in the Bible that says to renew your spirit. You renew it through study, through magic, your practice. But what that means is we don't just hear something one time, or read something one time, or do one single ritual and it sticks with us forever. You have to renew it. You have to constantly sort of refill yourself, to give yourself strength. You don't just eat one time and you're good to go for the rest of your life. Or you don't just go to the gym one time and you're in shape for the rest of your life. We have to renew ourselves. And we renew ourselves with things that inspire us in some way, things that help us get through the hard times. But what I was thinking about, I did an interview yesterday on a podcast, and at the end of the podcast, the guy asked me, we talked about everything during this interview. We talked about, me being on death row and how devastating that was, and we talked about, when I got out, and how, if anything, that was even more devastating. You don't get used to being in prison in a single day, and you don't get used to being out of prison in a single day. So that was incredibly devastating getting out of prison, and just like the recuperating process that I had to go through to, for years, to even start to get close to normal again. But it made me start thinking about sort of everything I've been through and everything I've experienced and everything I've seen on the, I guess you would call it, darker end of the spectrum. I can't even remember anymore all the death and destruction that has surrounded me at time periods in my life. Just things like with this guy, we were talking about how one of the guys in prison on death row at one point couldn't take it anymore. So he took a disposable razor and broke the blade out of it, and then wrapped himself up in a blanket in his cell and cut his own throat. And the reason he wrapped himself up in the blanket was so that it would soak up as much blood as possible, so that by the time the guards realized anything was going on, he would already be dead and it would be too late for them to do anything about it. I'd only been in prison on death row for a few weeks whenever they started carrying out executions. I'd been there a very, very short period of time when they executed 3 people at once. They carried 3 men that I was living with out of our barracks and put them to death. And you cannot imagine what that does to you, your psyche, your soul. I hadn't been there long when I was out on the yard one day, and maybe 10 feet away from me, I saw a man pull a knife out and start stabbing 2 other men. He stabbed one of them about 11 times. Stabbed the other one 7 or 8 times. And I'm watching this just feet away from me, watching these 2 men bleeding out on the ground. I saw men go stark raving insane. My own situation, myself, I was beaten. I was starved. I was in horrendous pain. I would watch, these people do horrible things to my family members whenever they came to see me, just because they didn't want them coming to the prison. They want to isolate you in every way you can. So Lori other people who would come to see me would have to go through these degrading conditions before they would even be allowed in to see me. But I started thinking about all this, and whenever I got out, after I got out, I can't even remember the first 2 years that I was out of prison, just because I was so psychologically shattered. I always tell people, if you add up everything that I can remember from the first 2 years that I was out, it may equal, a few hours. I was so shattered I could not even take care of myself. I was penniless. People think out here you're just spending money off of Johnny Depp's bank account or something. I don't know what the hell people are thinking, but my life has not been like that at all. There have been many times, more than one time, when I didn't have a penny to my name or even know how I was going to make rent the next month. Couldn't afford, like basic medical care things that I needed to have done. But when I was doing this interview yesterday, this guy asked me, he said, the last question I have for you is, what did you carry away from all this? After going through all this, after experiencing what you've experienced through all these different situations, the poverty and everything that you went through in your youth, and then going to death row and being shattered by that, and then getting out and being broken by that, and all of these things that you went through, from the outside it looks like a huge, scary ordeal, but what did you carry away from that with you? And I realized what it was that nothing happened to me. Everything happened for me. Everything that the world tried to use to hurt me, to break me, to destroy me, God, the divine mind, the universal will, whatever name you want to apply to it, whatever you're comfortable with, took those things the world tried to use to destroy me and used them to bless me. So nothing happened. I didn't know it at the time. At the time, it just seemed like I was going through horrendous ordeals. But in hindsight, I could look back and see how those things were in some way of benefit to me. And I'll just give you one example. When I was on death row, the only thing that I had to do to try to help myself, defend myself, was doing interviews with news stations, magazines, newspapers, whatever it was, all reporters that came to me. I always figured I've got nothing to hide, so I'm going to talk to them and to the best of my ability answer their questions. Doing that taught me how to speak publicly. It taught me how to convey and articulate ideas and emotions, because I had to practice. That stuff is hard. It's not like somebody just asks you a question and you give them a yes or a no answer. You've got to put it in context. You've got to really express nuance and depth and intricacy and all these different things that I would never have been able to do, like right now. It was doing all these interviews while I was on death row that taught me how to speak the way we're speaking right now. Yeah, there have been a lot of bad things in my life, a lot of hardships, but every single one of those hardships also blessed me with something in return. So that's kind of the message that I wanted to talk about today, is even if you're going through hard, difficult things that you don't understand, that you say, why would this be allowed to happen? What, things that we just can't wrap our minds around. One day, somehow, some way, you will be able to look back and realize that there was a blessing, a kernel, a core of blessing wrapped in all of that hardship. You'll see that something good did come from something bad. I love you guys. I hope you have a good day, and I'll talk to you back here tomorrow.